Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me again for just another amazing interview. I'm so excited about this interview. As you'll see here in just a moment, my good friend Haydn Bratt is joining me here this evening, his time. Uh, he is a good friend of mine. We're part of a mastermind together. And he has an organization in the UK called Mindset Associates, and I'll let him talk a little bit about that. But welcome, Hayden. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Hi, David. Thanks for inviting me onto this call. It's great to be with you. Really
Uh,
looking forward to it.
I've been looking forward to this for a long time. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself. Give them kind of a quick version of who you are and what you do.
Okay, so hi everyone. So my name's Haydn Bratt. I'm based over in the UK, just on the outskirts of London. And as David said, so I'm a leadership coach and facilitator, and I run an organisation called Mindset Associates. And we are a business that, as the name suggests, we really look at people's thought practices and thought processes to enable them to perform at their best. So we really focus on the thinking that then affects their behaviours and their habits. And we work with lots of corporate organisations. And we're an associate business, so we use a lot of different associates who help us with that. But we've got our kind of stated line is we are changing the world one leader at a time. So that's what we're trying to do.
I love that. No, that's fantastic. One leader at a time. What got you into this work, Hayden? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so way back when I was a teenager growing up, I actually wanted to become a lawyer. That
Wow.
was
Okay. Cool.
the thing I was really passionate about when I was a teenager, and I guess I kind of pursued that, and for various reasons, it didn't quite kind of work out. And what I've realised since, actually, as an aside, is I would have made a terrible lawyer.
I cannot imagine you as a lawyer.
No, absolutely not. So I kind of went into operations is where my career started, and when I was in operations, I found that I had this kind of real interest with helping others. I always got involved in the training of other people as an operational manager, and I was in retail, so I was in retail operations, a very people-centered business. So I spent a lot of time training other people, and that's really where I kind of, I suppose, ignited this interest in helping others, and I've always been somebody who wants to help others. Um, and then pursued a career that took me into learning and development, and spent about 20 years in corporate learning and development teams, again, helping people, delivering, facilitating, got involved in coaching, started to get more and more involved in the leadership side, and found, that was something that I loved, leading a learning team, and being a leader myself, and then also helping other leaders. And that's really where my passion for leadership in itself started to grow and develop. And then I was around about probably about 8 or 9 years ago now, and I went myself on a leadership retreat. So I was invited by a leadership coach to attend a leadership retreat, and they asked us to do one exercise, and it sticks in my head because it was the moment when kind of my world changed a little bit. Now I think this might speak to a lot of your guys who are listening to this, because
Yeah.
they asked me a question which was, we had four things to go away and think about, and those four things were: what were the victories in your life, what had the tragedies been, what were your triumphs, and what were your failures. So four really big questions to go away and have a think about. And we're in
Yeah.
a beautiful setting in actually in Scotland, in a castle, and we had about 2 hours to go and think into this question.
Wow.
Um, and then we all had to come back and kind of share our reflections and thoughts. And I was sat in this beautiful drawing room overlooking a loch, and the realization that came to me was I didn't have any.
Hmm.
And so, when I delved deeper as to kind of what was going on with that, I'd led such a safe existence and never really challenged myself enough that actually I didn't have anything that, for me, quantified or categorized under any of those four headings.
Yeah.
Um, and that was the point where I decided that actually I needed to go out and become a consultant and do it for myself, as opposed to working in a safe corporate environment. So that was for me the turning point, or the moment in my life when I realized that actually there's more I could do if I really
Sure.
challenge myself and push myself. I know you talk a lot about getting outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was the moment when I realized that I'd actually stayed in my comfort zone far too much, and if I really wanted to fulfill my life and follow my passions, then I had to step outside that comfort zone, and that's what led me to set up my business, which I did 6 years ago now.
Nice. Wow, that's interesting. So I am so curious about this. So what was it like? So you had this awakening first of all, but then so it was a couple years later. It sounds like then
Yeah,
that you actually stepped out and stepped outside of your comfort zone. What was it
yeah.
like when whether you sent the email or you signed on the dotted line and you said, "I'm out of here. I'm starting my own thing." Tell me what that felt like. How did that feel?
Um, so I No, it's really strange because people say it's kind of really quite courageous to go and do that, and it's maybe quite frightening to step outside and do. But for me, it just felt like the right thing to do. So the moment of sitting down with my boss and telling her that that's what I wanted to do and that I was looking to leave, and I did it respectfully, gave him plenty of notice, etc.
Sure.
Um, but actually, it just felt like it was the right conversation to be having and the right thing for me to do, and it was a relief is probably not quite the right word, but there was a sense of a fulfillment, a sense of you use the word awakening, a sense of
Yeah,
actually this is what I'm kind of meant to do now, and this is what the next chapter is going to be, and that chapter will turn out to be whatever it's going to be. But
that's awesome. Yeah.
it didn't feel like it was a scary thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's interesting because I think sometimes, I mean, I guess probably that's my frame of reference is that it's always like a scary thing when you're going out, quote unquote, on your own.
Mm.
But it doesn't necessarily have to be, especially when you know and you've already thought into what it is that I need to do or what's the next step for me. So I love that. I love that perspective. That's really
Yeah.
really interesting.
And I guess because of the way it happened, I had some time to think into what I wanted to then create when I did step out. It wasn't a For some people, I guess that can sometimes be quite a rapid transition. But for me, it was something that I had this awakening, had this moment, of realization, and then spent the next 12 months planning that.
Hmm.
So I really kind of thought, actually, I'm just fulfilling all that planning that I've actually put in place to enable me to then go out and face into this challenge.
Yeah, that's great. So where did you start? Like what was the place that you started and like what was the services? Was it just coaching? Was it actual leadership development? Tell me a little bit about what that start looked like for you.
Yeah, so my initial start was I went and got my professional qualification in coaching was one of the first things I did. So I'd already coached in my corporate environments and was quite competent and confident around coaching. But I felt like actually I needed to go and get the official qualification to validate my skills, but also give me something that I can market. So that was my first point of call to go and get. So I'm an ICF approved coach and get my qualification through the International Coaching Federation. Um, and then I had a real vision that it would become a very coaching led business, so very coaching focused, because that's what I love. Absolutely, love one to one coaching and the power of transformation I can bring to people. But you've also got to go where the market goes.
Right.
So when I first stepped out, actually, what people were more interested in was my skills as a internal L&D professional to help them to create programs, create frameworks, to build um, build a learning kind of resource or framework for them in their organizations. And that's what I found people really were calling me in to do as an external coach or consultant. And therefore, coaching became part of that, but wasn't the principal focus of the business. So that was a real, um, something that was a bit of a surprise to me because I thought I would be probably doing more coaching.
Sure.
Actually, what I ended up doing was building and designing and creating programs that incorporated coaching where we could, but were far more around that kind of facilitation of group development. And as I say, I think I've got a big belief in you can have a product and chuck it out there and hope that people will respond to it. but actually you've got to listen to the market as well, and you've got to help the market to help you shape what you do. So for me, tuning into what the market wanted was more important than just doing something because I particularly love it.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. Yeah, I agree with that as well. Well, one of the things I know that in your progression and as you have grown personally too, is that you wrote a book recently, and
Mm,
I don't I don't know the how long it took you to write that book, because I don't think we've talked about that.
no,
Uh,
absolutely, yeah.
so a how long did it take you to write that book? But the book, of course, I'm referring to is MicroLeadership, and so I love the things that you've discovered and you've written about in this book called MicroLeadership. Um, Tell us a little bit about that journey and what led you to write that book. What led you to some of the discoveries that you did?
Yeah, sure. So, as I said, when I was in the corporate world, I was very much in my comfort zone, and that also meant that I really didn't invest in my own learning and knowledge either. So I probably went through 10 years of just being very safe in that and not really exploring and learning and investing in my own development. And one of the things that I found when I stepped out as a consultant is I just had this massive hunger to learn again, to invest in my own knowledge, my own understanding, and to research into the craft that I'm really proud that I'm part of and really kind of make myself better in that field. And one of the things that I stumbled on about 3 years ago was a concept called learning agility, which is a skill that all modern leaders are going to need to develop to enable them to succeed in a rapidly changing environment where knowledge is no longer power and you don't know everything, and you can't possibly know everything, and where you are leading people who are probably more knowledgeable than you in their particular skill set. Um, so this ability to face into things that you've never faced before and deal with them first time was really kind of, I just found it fascinating. I found that
Yeah.
whole thought process fascinating, and that really was the kind of the catalyst for the journey that then led to micro leadership, because I started to delve deeper. And you and I share passions around kind of setting outside your comfort zone, and also peak performance and what drives peak performance and
Yeah.
performance cultures. I know it is something you're really passionate about as well.
Yeah.
Um, so I started to do a lot more reading and research into what makes humans perform at their best, whether that be in elite sports or elite business or elite arts. I just started to read a lot more around how do people perform at best, what makes them those peak specimens that we kind of celebrate. Um, and on the back of that, I really started to look at this concept of learning agility and facing into difficult situations that you've never experienced before. And then through all of that kind of reading, I became aware of this concept of VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, which is a phrase that's been coined by the military.
Right.
Um, and everything started to coalesce into the world is changing at a really rapid rate. And if we look at the way that we lead, a lot of our management practices, and I use that word management purposefully,
Hmm.
a lot of our management practices are actually rooted in the Industrial Revolution, which in the UK is 250 years ago,
Right.
um, about how do you organize and control people. That's what management is about. It's about organizing and controlling people. And yet we're in this world now where it's not about that. It's how do you attract real great talent towards your organization and then enable that talent to do what they do brilliantly well without having to control them, without having to try and organize them, but to influence them and to inspire them and to create movement in them that actually creates the results that we're looking for. So all of these thoughts started to come to my mind, and as I was researching and spending some time doing all this reading, there were six kind of traits that regularly came up that felt like they were consistencies in all of the different research and reading that I was doing, and also my own practice in my own coaching as well. So by this time, I'd be, coaching people at all different levels in different organisations, all different sizes, and there were some common themes that seemed to be coming up, and I guess it just kind of coalesced into this idea of, well, maybe actually there's just something for me to contribute in this area, which was, I guess, the start point of writing the book. And that's kind of what led me to sit down. So I'd had another concept in my mind for a while before that, which is still sitting there, and that might be book number two. But
I love it.
when it came to it, this was what really kind of started to fire me up. And I know again you're a keen cyclist, and I'm a keen supporter of cycling. Actually, I like cycling myself, but I'm a massive fan of road race cycling, so the Tour de France and other road
Yes.
races like that. And one of the other thing that kind of triggered was this concept of marginal gains, and the British Sky cycling team
Yes.
are the best components of this, or proponents of this in the world, in terms of this understanding that tiny little differences you can make that have a massive influence on overall results. And when you accumulate all these tiny little changes, they can make a significant difference in performance. And then I started to think, um, actually, if you think about even the biggest organizations and the most technologically advanced organizations with the most developed strategies in the world, those strategies only come about through the interaction between one person to the next. It's a
Yeah.
chain of interactions from one person to another.
Right.
No matter how big the organization is, that really makes a difference. And where the concept came from was it's those micro interactions between you and I, or the CEO and his boardroom or her boardroom, that actually brings strategy to life in any organization. We
Mm.
think of organizations and we often describe them as a third party,
Right.
but they're just collections of people who come together for a common purpose. And
Yeah.
what drives that common purpose is those individual interactions.
Yeah.
If the quality of those interactions is good, you deliver on strategy, you can hit your results, you can deliver amazing advancements and innovations. And if the quality of those interactions isn't good, then you get poor results, poor culture, toxic environments, and everything else that comes around. So that's really where the book started to come out of, this understanding learning agility and the way that the world is changing, looking at marginal gains and how you can make tiny improvements, knowing that organizations are fundamentally based up of individual relationships and how do you influence those relationships.
Yeah.
And then the other piece to the puzzle was then, again, I know you and I are both passionate and care a lot about habits and habit formation.
Hmm.
So what are the habits that create that? And those are, I guess, the ingredients that sit behind where the book came from.
I
um,
love that. I love that. That is such a. I think that's such a um, amazing insight, and I think it's an insight that I don't want people to miss, because the thing that you recognized is that and I love that you used the word management, not leadership, because management is about controlling people, and that's just it, controlling people and helping them, or having them fit into a mold, a process, where leadership, and what you're discovering is that, and what you discovered is that as individuals in the 21st century, we have things changing at such a rapid pace. It's no longer just, put this widget on the end of the line, let it go down the end, and then out comes a product. Yes, I know that still happens, but it's more about adapting to what happens when the market, between the time that widget starts and the end of the line, the market's changed. How do we change? How do we adapt to that? And so having the agility, the responsiveness to be able to say, wait a second here, we've got to be able to, somewhere in the middle, change. And I think that some of the things that you talk about is so important as leaders, as emerging leaders too, to be able to recognize that that we have to be able to adapt. And so, what were some of the things that? What were some of the key points? I know you talked about habits.
yeah.
And personal interactions, because I think those things are so key, and I love the fact that you talk about those little personal interactions, because I agree, we're not just an entity, we're people interacting in a group of
Mm.
people. So talk to that a little bit. What were some of those things that you found that were really, really important, and maybe they're your, kind of your key foundation?
Yeah, so the six habits that I ended up including in the book and writing about were came through this discovery. So understanding that you've got these individual changes, and that the concept of habit was around small, what may seem insignificant changes, but if you can make those small insignificant changes over time, they will deliver enormous results. So um, the kind of the subline of the book is the undeniable power of tiny interactions to create enormous results.
Mm.
And that's where that habit changes. So for all the people listening to this, it's understanding what are your current habits, and are those habits serving you, or are those habits actually creating the wrong results that you're, or not quite the results you're looking for, and what do I need to do to tweak those? And as I started to research it, I came up with these 6 key principles that came out, and I started to label these as what I called it the kind of 6 habits of a micro leader. And the first one was live in the gap, which is really about understanding opportunity and
Mm.
recognizing that in the gap is where opportunity exists, but also where we have control. So if you think back to Viktor Frankl's work in
Yeah, search for meaning.
it's Search for Meaning, absolutely, and he talks about the link between stimulus and response is a gap, and in the
Hmm.
gap is where you hold the power. And that was something that really resonated me. So as I started to look into that, I started to think about this concept of gap. So the gap between an idea and an action, the gap between a stimulus and a response, the gap between perceived and reality, the
Mm.
gap between um, uh, uh, 2 individuals in that place. And one of the things that I use as the analogy for this is, so I used to love playing your version of football. So
Sure.
and was really passionate about football when I was a kid. And one of the things I used to love was poring over the playbooks and think about actually how you position players to create the gap. And
Yeah.
that's the analogy that I've worked on. So how do you position things to create the gap, which is the opportunity to go on? So that was the first habit that I saw, as really successful people are able to create gaps and utilize gaps to help them to be successful.
Yeah.
The second habit is called be a connector.
Mm.
Really talks into everything is made up of personal connections.
Yeah.
The way I talk to you, where I'm connecting with you now, to whether you are part of a team or whether you're working with a different department, particularly again in the modern world where you are more often than not dealing with multinational organizations and globally remote teams, this
Hmm.
ability to connect both
Yeah.
ideas and principles and people together to create a whole was something that really kind of resonated. So that was how I labeled the second habit. Um, the third habit was around find a way. So the ability not to be deterred by mistakes, to not see hurdles as insurmountable, to have that resilience to keep going when things don't always go to plan,
Yeah.
um, to be creative as well. So
Sure.
in find a way is creativity to look at problems from different perspectives. And
Yeah.
again, coming back to what we said earlier, the world's changing all the time. So that widget that's at the start of your production line, if we're not able to adapt, to flex, to look at that problem in a slightly different way, we're going to chuck out something that's irrelevant at the far end. And actually,
Right.
the market's not going to want that. So our ability to adapt and change, to flex, to understand the dynamics and be creative in that process. So that was the third concept. Concept four was a concept called dare to fail.
Hmm.
And this really does talk into our willingness to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
our willingness to try something for the first time, maybe knowing that we don't really know if it's going to work or not, but we've
Yeah.
got to sit there. Um, how we respond to failure, how we respond to mistakes that happen. Do we use it as a learning thing? And this really talks into a lot of the research around the growth mindset and the fixed mindset from Carol Dweck.
Yeah.
What's our reaction response to when things don't go to plan? Uh,
Hmm.
we can put all the plans in the world, but life isn't like that, and particularly in a VUCA environment where things are completely uncertain and a bit chaotic, things are going to go wrong. How you respond in that moment. So that dare to fail was something that came out loud and clear. The next one was a really interesting one, which is called show up. So, and show up is all about actually how do you show up as a leader? How do you demonstrate accountability? How do you
Hmm.
demonstrate ownership? how do you take responsibility in the right moments for making the right decisions that are yours to make? But also, how do you help others in the business by devolving responsibility down so other people can make their decisions that are theirs to make as well? So,
Mm,
this real transition from being the patriarchal leader where everything comes from
yeah.
them into a leader who knows when they have to step in and show up, but also knows when they have to step back and show up in a
Yeah.
different way.
Sure.
So talks a lot into, and I know this is a concept we've spoken a few times about, which is this rather than doing, actually being. Who is the
Yes.
leader you're being as opposed to what you're actually doing.
Right.
Um, but it's an important part of the leadership. Um, for me, habits is when it is time for you to be the leader and to be out front, to be the first person who's going to go over the top. Sometimes you have to do that.
Yep. You do. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not about being that directive leader or demanding lead, but it is that person who is going to lead by example, show up when they need to show up, but without dominating and without it all being about them. So how do you get that balance right?
Yeah.
And that show up characteristic, that fifth habit, is then counteracted with the sixth habit, which is live to serve,
Mm.
which has its complete emphasis in servant-based leadership, uh,
Mm-hmm.
all of the stuff that Maxwell Sinek talk a lot
Right.
about how are you serving the team around you and how are you helping the people around you be brilliant. And that's one of the phrases I always use with my coachees and my delegates on programs is your principal job as a leader is to help your team be brilliant. So how do you do that?
Talk to me a little bit about the interaction of that with being a connector, because to me, being a servant leader or someone who is looking out for somebody else, to me, that's a way too that I can connect with my team, or with somebody else on another team. If I'm looking at their what I can do for them and serving them, that helps me to connect. Is there kind of a connection there?
There is, yeah. There is a definite correlation between the two, um, and you often find people who are particularly strong on the be a connector tend to be quite strong around the live to serve,
Hmm.
but it's not the whole picture on both, which is why I separated them out as two separate habits.
Gotcha.
So the live to serve is definitely a mindset, and it's
Mm,
definitely part around I genuinely am going to put myself at the service of others, and I'm going to flip the traditional hierarchy to know that I'm holding you up and helping you as opposed to you're there to help me.
mm,
The be a connector side also has the elements of connecting, almost joining the dots in the world. So a good leader needs to be able to not just connect people, but connect systems, processes, um, join up ideologies with individuals as well as just the human connection side. So the be a connector is puts people at the heart of that, but it's about how do the people within that system connect with the system itself, and how do you
okay.
facilitate a network that enables things to happen, and that network could be a human network or it could also be a system network.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So if there was one of those habits, of those six habits that you see as would there be one that rises to the top that you say without this, then the rest of them aren't quite as effective? Is there one on that list that's more important than the other, or are they equally important?
So it's interesting. So one of the things that I created as part of the program was a micro assessment, which is what I call it, which is actually a measure of your current focus on those six habits. So
Okay,
everyone who comes on my program has the chance to complete this micro assessment, and we do
cool.
analysis of where their current focus is,
Yeah.
um, and that will show where they have a current strength or area for improvement around the six habits. There is no kind of one standout habit. I think they're all important. But if I was going to take one thing in terms of principle from the book, it is to everybody thinks, say, kind of this phrase about think big.
Yeah.
Actually, the big thing for me is to think small. So
Mm,
you can think big and you have big ideas, and I would absolutely want to. I'm massively passionate about being ambitious in your goals and kind of shooting for whatever you can and really stretching yourself in terms of what you can achieve, because our only limits are on our beliefs. But when it comes to making that come to life, we need to think small. We need to think about those individual interactions, the way that you can spend 5 minutes with somebody and you can completely change the way that their day is going through that 5 minute interaction. We don't need to invest lots and lots of time in doing lengthy one-to-ones with our teams. We can change the way of the course of somebody's day in 60 seconds with a well-placed remark or a timely interjection in one way or another, or a small interaction that can make a big difference to the way that those people are feeling on that day, or how they go about their jobs. And that's, for me, if there's nothing else that you take away from micro leadership, it's the micro part. It's the stepping into the smaller details that really make a difference. Um, and I purposely, some people are challenging, why did I call it micro leadership when obviously the phrase micromanagement is a bad thing.
Yeah, right.
I guess I wanted to be a little bit controversial with that, because micromanagement is an absolute bad thing. But if we take the word management is about control, that's really controlling the minuscule details, which is what micromanagement is, not allowing anything to happen without you being in control of it.
Yeah.
Whereas my definition of leadership is movement. For me, leadership is about creating movement in others, either emotionally, physically, spiritually, however that movement is. But it's about creating a movement to somebody else. So
Yeah.
for me, micro leadership is about you create that movement through the tiny interactions that you have with those people.
I
So
love
that for me is what the habits are great, and they sit outside in terms of how you do that in those 6 ways. But fundamentally, it's about those tiny movements that you can make in people through a simple interaction, changing the way that you choose to follow your morning routine, changing the way that you happen to hold your meetings or your one-to-one. Those tiny little changes we can make that can make a significant difference to the way that people feel on the back of it. The movement we try and create in people is what, for me, micro leadership really is about.
I love that. It's so many times I think, like as you said earlier, we think about all of these big things that we think we need to do, this big project or this big program or this big thing, but it really is. It's the small things, and it's the little things consistently over time that make such a huge difference. And I think that's really needed in business today. I really I believe that wholeheartedly. So you mentioned a program that you have as well, and if I'm recalling the name correctly, it's called Crack the Code. So talk a little bit about that program.
Yeah, so Crack the Code is a program that I've devised, and again, I talked earlier about being market led. So one of the things that I did was, so I'm a big fan of LinkedIn as a network, and use it as a learning resource. It's a great learning resource for me personally,
Sure.
and I did as part of obviously promoting the business. So one of the things I did is I went out to my network and said, if you were to face into your if you think about people leadership, what's the one thing that you have the biggest challenge with? And canvas some views and thoughts. And the most consistent theme that came back was on how do we motivate others.
Mm,
And so I started to think into this and created a free webinar, which people were able to sign up to attend. And I wanted to put something of real quality and real value in it. So I started to really research into motivation again. It's a topic that I love and have spent a lot of time looking at. But I really went back over all of the different themes and threads that I had to pull this webinar together. And as I started to look at it, I actually started to think about it as a code, a code that we need to break. Actually, how do we get the best out of people around us? And actually, sometimes it can feel like it's a bit of a puzzle that we need to solve. And how do
yeah.
we come up with a code that unlocks that potential? As I started to create it, I kind of had this image of the old style safe where you have to turn the dials to get
Oh
these
yeah.
and
Yeah.
drops into place. And that's where the kind of Crack the Code came from. And what I built on the back of that is an 8 session leadership program that talks into how do we take the key concepts around inspiring, supporting, developing people around us, build it into an online program, and as part of that, my delegates get access, similar to in your emerging leaders group, to get access to your qualified coaching. The same in my group, where they get access to ask questions around real life situations that they're facing into, that I can talk into. So I do around about 30 minutes of input or teaching on a particular lesson, as I call them.
Yeah.
And the rest of the time is over to the delegates to ask me any questions that I can help them with in terms of advice, guidance, or some live coaching that potentially helps them to overcome those challenges. So yeah, it's been a good journey so far, and it's seems to be getting some great feedback from the people on it, which is good.
That's great. So I want to make sure that before we end our time together, that you let people know like how to get a hold of you and how to get in touch with you. So what's the best way for people to get in touch with you and maybe even find out some more about your program?
Yeah, so if people want to particularly know more about micro leadership, then we've got a website which is microleadership.co.uk.
Okay.
So that's our site for micro leadership. And on there, if anybody wants to log on there, there's a free resource actually on there, which is a series of 6 videos called the Power Mindset, and they are 5-minute thinking practices that everybody can apply in their lives daily. That can
Awesome.
help them to create a more positive, progressive, optimistic mindset, which I call the power mindset. So go along to Micro Leadership. You can check it out there. If you want to know more about what we do from the Mindset Associates side, the kind of broader consultancy work, then again, it's mindsetassociates.com is our web address, and again, you can get hold of us there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, one last question for you. Actually, two. Two. Sorry, I lied. Two. So, if you had any advice for an emerging leader, someone
Yes.
who is either new to their role or is new to leadership or wanting to go kind of to the next level in their own leadership, what would that advice be? What would you say to that person?
Okay. So two things come automatically to mind. The first is um, remember your job is not to come up with the best answer, but your job is to come up with the best question.
I love that.
Yeah.
Speaking my
So
language, brother.
absolutely. So because we often think that we need to be the person with all the answers, and that can drive some behaviors that aren't helpful actually.
Right.
Um, so that would be the first piece of advice that I give people is just remember that your job is to ask the best questions, not to give the
Yeah.
best answers. And the second thing would be to just learn, consume, keep investing in yourself. So again, what I always say to people is Jeff Bezos, the guy who runs Amazon, he's famed for saying that the biggest challenge for Amazon as an organization is to stay relevant in the world,
Yeah.
and it's the same for all of us.
For
For
us
all
too.
of those emerging leaders that are stepping into leadership for the first time, how are you going to stay relevant in 10 years' time if you don't continue to invest in yourself and your own learning and your own knowledge, whether that be through investing in programs like yours where you go and work with a great coach, or reading podcasts. There is so much information available to us than ever before.
Yeah.
Invest time. So one of my thought processes in Power Mindset is what I call the 10% club, which is investing 10% of your financial resources and your energy in your own future.
Your
Um,
own.
like any business would invest in R&D,
Yep.
you have to invest in your own R&D. What's your own
Yeah.
research and development in your own? If you think of David Inc., the business, you need to invest in your future, just
Yeah.
like Inc. needs to as well. So that would be my other piece of advice: was invest 10%. It's a good number to think about. So if you think about the average working week, that's maybe 5 hours a week that you
Yeah.
invest in yourself.
It's only an hour a day.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic advice. I appreciate that. Okay, so this is the last question. I've been asking everybody that I've interviewed and talked with. About this sign that I have on my wall. You've
Yeah.
probably seen it. Play like a champion today. And since you love American football,
Yeah.
um, what does playing like a champion mean to you?
It's a great question, and I love that sign. Love that sign. Whenever I've seen that, I just yeah, it brings a smile to your face.
Yeah.
Um, Playing like a champion for me is it automatically comes to this kind of concept of self belief. So for me, playing like a champion, if I take that phrase and take it quite literally, if I'm going to play like a champion, champions believe in themselves, and they believe in themselves because they work really hard to be champions.
Hmm.
They put all the hard yards in on the training ground or in the practice areas, so they can step out onto that turf with the belief that they are going to be champions. Um, and that's what it really means for me. It's about having the belief in yourself, having the confidence to step across the white line, knowing that you can go out there and perform at your absolute best, but also knowing that you put the hard yards in to get there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
nothing. I was chatting about this with somebody the other day. Actually, we only ever see champions when they're at that champion status. We
Right.
never see all the hard work, all the failures, all the times when it's not gone right. That
Yep.
sits behind the scenes. We don't see any of that. We only see that championship winning performance, or that great pass, a great catch, a great run that we may observe. But we don't know how many times they've practiced that. We don't know how many times they've done that drill to get there.
To get
So
there.
that
Yeah.
for me is go out there, step out there, and have the confidence to be a champion, but don't leave yourself short. So when you do step out there, you can have that belief because it's built on all the effort, all the energy, all the hard work, all the commitment,
Yeah.
all the deliberate practice that you've been doing to make yourself that champion.
I love that. That is fantastic, Hayden. That's what a great way to end our talk today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your input and for all that you're doing to help leaders all across the world to invest in themselves, to be able to become better leaders, to become aware of some of the things that you talk about in micro leadership. And I love you. I love your work, and I love what you're doing. So thank you for taking the time to be here, especially as I know it's late in the UK. So I really do appreciate that, Hayden.
No, thank you for inviting me on. It's been great to talk to you, and I always love our conversations. So yeah, it's been great to spend some time with you.
Likewise. Well, hey, thanks so much, everybody, for joining us again. Appreciate your attention. Definitely reach out to me if you like these interviews. Just reach out to me. Let me know what you like, what you'd like to hear more of, and what's resonating with you. I'd really love to be able to hear what your takeaway is, especially from this conversation. There were so many good ones. I'm going to go back and listen to it when I can, so that I can get back to some of those pieces that Haydn gave to us today about micro leadership and the habits that he's identified. So thanks again for listening, and bye for now.